Good afternoon, everyone. Keynotes after lunch, and that too last one, is often a challenge. And the very first keynote, Mahesh talked about Gen X and how useless they are when they are supposed to address a conference where we have this bubbling energy and youngsters. So I am one of the Gen X who is director in DPIIT in Government of India, and it's my responsibility in the central government to shape policies that promote innovation and ultimately make our ecosystem responsive to whatever demands come from the startups and the various ecosystem players. In 2016, when National Startup Policy was announced, so I am again going to reiterate 2016. And the number of startups in India at that point of time, 400 odd. What is the number we have today? 1,90,000, counting almost 2 to 3,000 startups added to our ecosystem every day. And how do we rank internationally? In terms of valuation and the number of unicorns that have come out of India, it's the third largest ecosystem. So how has it become possible? The strength of the country lies in the innovation potential of the youth that is there. And I also know that Sri Lanka is also bestowed with the same kind of energy, the same kind of demographic dividend that is there. So what we did in India is something which I would like to share with you. So the very first thing that was done was to have an agency which, if anyone who wants to do anything with startup, say there has to be a centralized agency. So there was this one Section 8 agency called as Invest India, which was carved out, where we hired people from the private ecosystem, people who have had experience of running ventures, so that the government has a specialized body who actually knows what is the treatment that can be given. For example, in a different context, if I'll say that if we are tackling medical problems, it is ideal that we should have professional doctors rather than bureaucrats running that. So what we need to do is to enable that kind of institution where we have professionals there. So that was the first thing. Second is, what is the requirement that a startup has? Is the funding requirement. So there are three schemes which were executed. The first one was Fund of Fund scheme, which is 10,000 crores. And I would like to share the success story of that. What started as a 10,000 crore with mobilization from private sector has ended up becoming 90,000 crore. And these are the commitments that have flown into startups within the country. I would also like to highlight that out of this 90,000 crore, the foreign fund mobilization, the venture capital coming from outside the country is around 70%, which is a very, very significant amount. But it was only possible if we could have created that structure. And I would like to share with the honorable ministers and the representatives of the government who will be there, is that we have a SEBI which regulates all the alternate investment funds, and category 1, category 2 funds are the funds which are allowed to invest in this startup ecosystem. After a time, we learned that, this funding is basically going into startups who are basically scaling up. Because when we are involving AIFs in private funding, we see that they are not interested in investing in the early stage startups, which we as a country felt that we have to have focus on those, because that is where the valley of death is, that is where actually people struggle, and that is also where majority of the startups lose their valuation and end up only having 20, 30, 40% stake even when they become successful. So that is where we came up with the seed fund scheme. It started in 2019. And through that scheme, which also finishes this year, we have been able to support 240 odd incubators. And the scheme had a structure of giving funding to incubators, and these incubators were institutions like IITs, NITs, AIMS, and even the private institutions. Initially, it started with only government institutions, but there was a demand which came from private institutions also, and it was felt that they should also be made eligible. And currently, we have 240 such institutions which are part of the network. We give funding to those incubators, and the startups apply to those incubators through an online dashboard, and it's absolutely transparent. What is the beauty of this scheme is a startup is given option to apply to any of the 3 incubators which is listed on our website, and the incubators have to decide yes or no within 45 days. And the fund flow of also happens around 40% of the fund which is committed by an incubator to the startup also has to go within 10 days of that commitment. So that is the timeline we work on. The benchmarking we have done for ourselves is 60 days, and we have been able to deliver. And I'm very happy to share that majority of the tier 2, tier 3 cities which got funding, the startups which got funding actually got funding from this scheme. Another scheme which was started 2 years back is called Credit Guarantee Scheme. What was felt was that many of the startups do not have any assets which they can give as collateral for them to raise money from the banks. So what we did is government took that guarantee. So this credit guarantee scheme is especially very, very important for those startups who are not wanting to raise funding from the venture fund, but they want to take funding, and they don't want equity, but they want working capital because they don't want to lose on the ownership. So that is where we come in. In this year budget, the Honorable Prime Minister and the Finance Minister, on the demand of the ecosystem, increased the maximum amount from 10 crores to 20 crores per startup. So these were the 3 funding schemes which actually, through these schemes which we helped the startup ecosystem. But is funding the only thing that is required? What can government do more to mobilize capital to startups? Another thing which was done in the country was giving tax rebate. So what we have is what we call as an interministerial board. So the startups who have to get this exemption have to apply to the government that yes, our product is solving this problem and it is innovative. So if a particular startup is innovative and is leading to a particular solution in the society, it is considered for income tax exemption, and as of now, more than 6,000 startups have benefited it. But when we, interacted with startups, many a time they said that, sir, we don't want money. What we really need is government not to bother us, or deregulation is something which we want you to focus on. So when we analyzed, what were those rules and regulations which were repetitive, which were also there in one state, where again for the same thing you had to take approvals from the other state, also approvals from the central government. So there was this concept of ease of doing business. We were helped by World Bank and many other such entities. And over a period of time, the Startup India department, who's basically focused on, the startups, has been able to work on 67 such regulatory reforms, which has really helped the ecosystem. Last year, what was one of the bigger achievement was the, taking away the angel tax. So this was about deregulation. The third thing, which again is very, very important, is a startup ends up with the product, but there is no market. How to ensure that the product or the services offered by the startup are also utilized by the states? Because many of the time, the procurement systems do not have mechanism by which they can procure services of the startup. So this challenge was identified. So what we did is, because obviously the startups do not have, that much of funding or resources that a mature company will have. So we did away with the experience requirement. We did away with the earnest money requirement for startups, and they can participate in any of the tenders that the government does. We are also wanting, to ensure that there is a minimum level of procurement that happens. That's a fixed percentage which we are taking up with our concerned ministry, Department of Expenditure. But I would request on behalf of startups that the competent authority here may think about even having reservation for procurement of government services and products of a particular percentage. The other thing, which we experienced over a period of time is that you do not work in silos. You have to have international bridges. You have to have opportunities to the startups to work, to scale up internationally. So we came up with the concept, especially after the COVID, where we felt that, our supply lines have to be very robust and we need to work on it in an institutional manner. So we have 21 bridges with the many countries, including US, including many countries of Europe, even in Asia, where Singapore and many other such countries, where we have landing pages where any startup from that particular country wanting to access the Indian market can apply, and vice versa also, where any startup from India who wants to scale out in a particular market or want to have incubator or some R&D exposure, they do apply, and they are provided all kind of support. So this is something which we did as a government, but another thing which happened is, which many of the speakers highlighted in the presentation, was the UPI. So I would also take a minute to talk about how the government focus on not only making physical infrastructure, but infrastructure which is relevant for economy which is wanting to become a developed economy. So the concept of UPI came, where we have this layers made by layers which interoperability is possible, where the private sector is allowed to bring their innovation, and it is absolutely free to the private sector. Another thing which government is working on, and you will come to know about it more and more in future years, is the ONDC protocol, as we call it, basically making sellers and buyers absolutely giving them opportunity so that the true rate is discovered in the market. What was felt is that many of the MNCs working internationally, there is a distortion, and many a times the products and the services which many of our startups were making, they were not getting the right price for that. So ONDC is another initiative which Government of India is working on. Another thing which we are working on the similar line, is how we can have energy stack, where we can have energy which may be renewable, which may be coming from coal, and how we can make mechanisms so that, again, that kind of interoperability is there also. So I really believe that the last month figures is, I just have it in front of me, that UPI has crossed a historic 20 billion transaction in August, and the total value is USD 282 billion in one single month. So that is the power. In 2019, it was as good or as bad as any other country, but the focus of the government on a particular sector does lead to positive results, and I really do believe the events like this also bring in energy which makes all stakeholders, and government being one of the main stakeholders, to take action to improve situation, so that ultimately the citizens of your country and our country are benefited. And as highlighted by one of the speakers, that ultimately what does a startup do? It makes life simpler, it makes life better, and I really believe that by building by focusing on capacity building, by focusing on early stage finance, by having market linkages, there is something which the Sri Lankan government should work on. And Disrupt Asia is more than a conference. It is a commitment to make South Asia the most exciting testbed for inclusive and explorable tech. If India brought population scale digital rails, Sri Lanka brings agility, global facing talent, and strategic location that works with Australia in the morning, Europe by day, and US at night. Let us use this time zone spot to run the world's fastest cross-border pilots and publish what we learn openly for others to replicate. Let us build an inclusive, agile, globally connected ecosystem that empowers Sri Lankan entrepreneurs to create, scale, and innovate. And let us remember that behind every successful startup is a story of resilience, support, and collaboration. Thank you, Colombo. Let's build.